My name is Peter Young, and I'm a member of the Committee of 100, and I also happen to be the CEO of Young Partners, an investment bank focused on life sciences and chemicals. And I want to welcome you to the fifth of a series of events orchestrated by the Committee 100 around the topic of Asian American career ceilings. We're very privileged to have three really wonderful panelists from different backgrounds who are leaders in their area in terms of trying to deal with this problem, which is a serious issue. I do want to say that we're very pleased that 475 people registered for this. Obviously, there'll be some no-shows, but it does show that there's intense interest in this issue. And although in some areas, perhaps, it's gotten a little better over the years, but it's still really a serious problem. And I think the first webcast we did in February, which was how bad is the problem, really illustrated that. The numbers looked really bad, right? Relative to all sorts of things, and certainly relative to Asian Americans' presence in the population. Before I do that, though, I just want to say that those of you who are less familiar with Committee 100, it is an organization that's been in existence for 31 years, and it was started by a group of 5 founders, including Yo-Yo Ma, I.M. Pei, and others, who basically felt that it was very important to have a group that focused on 2 missions. One, the problems on the domestic side with regard to the Asian American community, their ability to be protected, their ability to succeed, their ability to not be discriminated against, and the other side is U.S.-China relations, which obviously have gotten even more difficult today than when the organization was first started, right after the Tiananmen Square incident. So those of you who are interested in the organization, our website is committee100.org. This program is really designed not to try to reinvent the wheel, because to be honest with you, there are so many fantastic organizations that have been focused on this issue now for many years. And I'd like to mention a couple. Obviously, we have a couple of them here as panelists, but just to mention some of them, we have Ascend Leadership, which focuses on business professionals. We have Asian American Lead, which is short for Asian American Youth Leadership Empowerment and Development. We have Aspire, which is focuses on empowering Asian American women. We have Asian Pacific Leadership Institute. We have the Asian Pacific American Institute for Congressional Studies. We have OCA, which focuses on a lot of the congressional legislative things and a broad set of things, and they've taken a great leadership role. We have CAPAL, which is Conferences on Asian American Pacific American Leadership, which is a Capitol Hill group. We have National Asian Pacific American Bar Association, and we have an Asian American Government Executives Network, which we're privileged to have Vivian Chen, who is the head of that group, on this call. We have the National Association of Asian American Professionals, and we have LEAP, which Linda Akutagawa is head of. And of course, we have a lot of people within organizations such as Ann Lim O'Brien, who is a senior partner at Heidrick & Struggles, who has led the effort there in terms of trying to, because they have a very influential role on what happens to corporate leaders and board members. So I applaud all of these organizations, and we feel our job is really not to duplicate what they do, but to try to enhance what they do, help to create a dialogue and to convene people, but also to fill in gaps where perhaps things are missing, right? So with that, I'd like to say that the approach we're going to take, I'll introduce the 3 panelists, but the approach we're going to take is we'll start with the big picture, which is I want the panelists to talk about what are the things that they feel are being done by a variety of organizations out there. And then gradually, as we go through the conversation, we're going to talk more. We'll end up with each of them talking about their own organizations and what they're doing. And I also, lastly, just want to say that we're going to divide this hour. The first 5 minutes is my welcoming comments that I'm giving now. We're then going to leave about 40 minutes for the panel discussion, and that depending upon how many questions that you ask, we'll leave 15 minutes or so for a Q&A at the end. Now, the way you ask questions, very straightforward. There are two functions on your screen if you're an attendee. There's the traditional chat function where you can type in a question, and there's the Q&A function as well. And I encourage you not to wait until the end of the 40 minutes to put in your questions. Please put them in, that way I'll see them and I'll be able to look at them and choose them and direct them to the panelists. So briefly, I'm just going to just say who our three panelists are. Alphabetically, Linda Akutagawa is President and CEO of LEAP, which is Leadership Education for Asian Pacifics. And she's going to talk about the really important role they have about trying to educate and train executives, Asian American executives, to be successful. Dr. Vivian T. Chen is chair of the Asian American Government Executives Network. And obviously their name makes it pretty clear what they do, which is they try to empower and train government officials. And by the way, we had, as one of our previous webcasts, Gary Locke talked about the importance of serving in government. And he gave a wonderful talk about not only his own experience, but also what Asian Americans really have to do to succeed politically, because we're very much underrepresented. And the last is Anne Lim O'Brien. She is not Irish, but she is vice chair and a senior partner at Heidrick & Struggles, and she is very much heavily involved in the firm's activities with regard to diversification in corporate leadership and in the board ranks, both of which obviously there's a lot of work to be done. So before we start though, I'd like to have each of them, perhaps in order, alphabetical order, as I said, just briefly take a minute and just talk about a little bit about their personal background, you know where they come from and so forth, in whatever they wish to say. So Linda.
All right. Thank you so much, Peter, and thanks for inviting me to join you on this important conversation. And thank you to the Committee of 100 for organizing these series around the glass ceiling. I think these kind of continued conversations are really important because I think as each succeeding generation comes along, I think there's always going to be questions. And I think it's incumbent on all of us who have walked a little further ahead down the road. I don't want to say really far down the road, but a little further down the road. I think it's important for us to be able to share what we're seeing, what we've experienced, so that hopefully we'll be able to help them avoid roadblocks, so that then as others that come behind us can also then avoid roadblocks, but as they come up against others, they'll also do the same and pay it forward by helping others avoid those roadblocks as well too. So I'm the president and CEO of an organization called LEAP, as Peter had introduced me. It's Leadership Education for Asian Pacifics. Organizationally, LEAP has been around now for close to, we're 38 years old, I guess, coming close to our 40th anniversary. I haven't been there that long myself. I've been there a while, but I haven't been there. I'm not a founder, but I thought about just where LEAP plays a role in the history of Asian America, partly because I was just having this conversation, especially when we think about all that's happening in the world, and we're talking about all the histories of communities of color, particularly the Black community. But I also think it's important that we talk about, what's Asian American history and where's our place in all that's happened as well too. And in just really reflecting upon how we've been able to benefit by those that have gone ahead of us, I realized that LEAP has been around now 40 years, and we're focused on, I like to say—
Linda, I'm going to interrupt because you're not following instructions.
Yes.
You're now talking about what is in the last part of our 40 minutes. So
sorry.
I'll interrupt you there, and we'll get back to that later. So maybe we'll move to Vivian, right? Vivian?
Oh, good. I'm going to get the hook too. Hi, everyone.
I promised I was going to be a strict moderator. So
you did. Can I just to answer something that I know Anne wanted to cover, I am second generation or
Okay,
first generation American born. My parents, I'm born in California, so.
that's right. Which we know is a foreign country, right?
Yes, yes.
Vivian.
Well, I have a complicated relationship with all that's going on, and I can't. Let me just say that I think it's an important time that we have this dialogue because it still substantiates some of the problems we have in general.
Yeah.
I view the bamboo ceiling as a serious concern for APIs and being able to be promoted within the ranks of whatever work environment they're in, and it's certainly true in the federal government. I'm fortunate to be a senior executive working in the Forest Service, but I'm also chair of the Pacific Asian Government Executive Network because of that, because of my struggle joining the federal system, public service in the 70s, and watching affirmative action, being a part of the women's lib movement, being a part of a lot of things where there are a lot of isms that we've been trying to overcome, and always being on the edge, always being that quote of considered model minority who is successful and doesn't need help and or can be counted but not included. So there's a lot that I can say about this because certainly I've lived a lot of it. Growing up in the Midwest, I am first generation and I experienced incredible discrimination. I
Oh,
was always,
and we're of a similar generation, and people don't realize how bad it was. I mean, I grew up in Virginia, Japan, and Hawaii, but when I was going through grade school in Virginia, it was actually against the law for an Asian American to marry a Caucasian. It was
Oh,
literally
wow.
yeah,
against the law.
right,
I mean, it's just
right.
astonishing, and I'm not 100 years old, right? And but I think one other comment before I go on to Anne is, it occurred to me as Linda was talking, is it actually, the current environment with all this negative feeling between China and the US, it's actually made things worse, right? So although on certain dimensions, things have
Yeah,
improved over time, but the current environment is deadly, right, around this issue. And it's for Chinese Americans, but it's more than just Chinese Americans, right?
yeah,
You
right.
know, I mean, there's a story about a Korean American who was harassed and said, I don't care whether you're Chinese or not, you're all bad, right? So that's an environment now. Anne, you want to comment?
Sure. Thank you, Peter, and thank you to the Committee of 100 for inviting me to share my perspectives today. And I want to thank everyone for listening in to this. Is a subject matter that I care a lot about, and I'm happy to be here and to share what I know. My life actually as an Asian American, as we call it, has been a tale of two cities. I have spent half of my life in Singapore, where I was born and raised, and the other half in New York City when I got married to an American who I met at Pricewaterhouse at work. And thank goodness, Peter, it's not in your era because we're here happily married. But I spent half my life in the U.S. and we have two sons. My husband is not the typical American husband. He's an evolved father and husband. He had a great career. I was a trailing spouse. And so here I am. We have reverse roles. He's raised our children. They're happy and graduated from college. I enjoy what I do. But my point is, as an Asian American woman, I could not have felt good nor do what I do without a supportive spouse. So I'm grateful to all spouses who support us, male or female.
Yeah, that's right. Well, in my case, my wife is very busy. I'm very busy. So our son just raised himself. Okay, so let's go on. Let's get the big picture and let's really try to stay with the big picture. Let's think about all of us. Let's think about what is being done to solve this problem and to set the stage. You know, there are things that are being done in different venues, in companies, right? In organizations like, LEAP or IGEN, that are nonprofit organizations, but also within government, so forth. So but they also seem to fall into certain groups, right? It's either education and empowerment, or it could be mentoring and networking. You know, they fall into certain buckets. So what I'd like the three of you to, and you know, and we don't have to all talk about each question, but how would you characterize the things, the organized things that are being done to try to solve this problem? You know, and regardless of whether it's in a government or agency, or whether it's a nonprofit or in companies. So this is directed to any one of you, if who wants to address this.
Well, let me begin. I think that there are a number, Peter, of things that are going on. And it's a confluence right now at this time. I think it's really an interesting time. You know, racism is not new to any of us, and discrimination, exclusion is not new to any of us. But yet the Asian Americans have in part have a double-edged sword. They've benefited from it, and yet they've been penalized by it. And because of that, you'll see that, like I was saying earlier about the bamboo ceiling, I think that, you know, the cultural, what we bring in culturally is so, struggles in the American society in terms of, if you're brought up like I am, first generation, of working hard, being quiet, family oriented, being passive, not being even permissive, anti, you know, not a rebel raiser. So that creates formal stereotypes that are interpreted as Asians are not prepared to be leaders, that they're not communicators, they don't know how to speak English, they don't know how to manage, they're not interested in management, et cetera, for whatever reason. And that creates some of this problem, I think. And that's what Ajin has tried to overcome by working with individuals to help them with their career path to move into the executive ranks, because we are underrepresented.
But thinking broadly, not, we're straying back to just your own organization.
Right,
Thinking
okay.
across, because all of you are familiar, right, with all the different organizations that are being, where seems to be the places where people really are putting a lot of energy and, you know, how would you, I read a long list of organizations, right? But
well, I think
you see somewhat of a pattern, right, across them, right?
Well, but this is important, Peter, because I think that we try to fit into where other things are happening. You know, so because of affirmative action, there's been a lot of programs that have been started for other minority groups, mentoring, pathways programs in government, training programs, internships, et cetera, that have allowed those other groups to advance themselves because they have a network, they've been able to move forward, they can, at least in government, get jobs without competition.
But are we not doing that for Asian Americans?
They're not included in a lot of these programs.
Yeah.
But I think there are a lot of, I mean, I think I hear what you're saying, Peter. I think what you're asking is what are the organizations, what are they doing?
Right.
And you're right.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's organizations that are formed both, I'm going to say on both the national and local / regional level, that are centered around networking. Like, for example, like to me, I think Ascend is one of those kind of organizations that's really great at bringing different people from different levels together from a networking perspective. I know that they do some mentoring programs. I think that I'll put in, you know, I think Ajin is one of those, but I think you also have some organizations that also straddle other grounds. So like for LEAP, we're about the leadership development portion, really being able to give, I think, Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders those kind of, that skills, the confidence, the mindset that I think we need to really compete. Also doing the research as well too, because I think that's also what's been missing, is that I think there, to what Vivian was talking about, I think there's a persistent perception that we are doing much better than what I think we are actually doing. And what we're
I mean, a lot of people say, well, what is there really a problem, right?
Yeah,
that's a common reaction. You really have a problem, you know? right?
Well,
And
Peter,
unless we show them the numbers, you know, people almost don't believe. I mean, the what Vivian talked about, the whole model minority. I think even within our own community as Asian Americans, I think there's a lot of people who really buy into that and are holding on tight to it.
So a lot of the effort, I'm going to turn this over to Ann. So a lot of the effort has to do with how do you get people trained in the orientation and the skills to break through, because I think the data shows that actually Asian Americans do really well getting into good colleges, and they do well in entry jobs, but when they get to the middle ranks, it becomes a disaster. So that's a perfect way to segue to Ann and just say, what do you see
as the problem
happening there in terms of corporate leadership at the senior ranks, but
Absolutely.
also boards of directors, which is equally important, right?
Yeah. So Peter, I'll take a step back. I think that, at Heidrick & Struggles, we help our clients acquire and develop leadership talent at both the executive levels and the boardroom levels. And the conversation around D&I, diversity and inclusion, is really very central. It's critical, it's complex, and in today's current corporate environment, it is at the forefront. And particularly, Peter, I think we're riding on the crest of the wave of Black Lives Matter. And even as I say it, when I was thinking about it today, I read the letter from the CEO of PepsiCo about what they are going to do in a concerted effort. And I think we can learn from how other minority groups are being advanced and what companies are doing about it. I do think that we have to ask ourselves, Peter, whether the problem is whether it's a supply issue or a demand issue that's not happening. Asian Americans represent about 5% of the US population, and they will be 9% in 2050, but they only count for less than 0.3% of corporate officers and less than 1% of corporate board members. Yeah. So there's definitely a very, very, there's a great opportunity, let's just put it for us, to be able to improve those numbers. But is it a supply issue? Is it the availability of qualified talent? Or, if that is so, I mean, it depends on how we're defining it in each corporation, in each company, in each organization. If it's a supply issue, the availability of qualified talent, what can we do about it? Training, mentoring, availability and visibility of role models, of which we don't have enough, so. And if it's a demand issue on the employer side issue versus the employee side issue, then what can we do to incentivize and motivate these companies to be more aware, more accepting, better able to act on the need for leadership and boardroom diversity? And you need a culture of inclusion. And most companies that are progressing today, progressing well in the D&I agenda, are doing it. There's a culture of inclusion.
I have a different perspective that I want to perhaps
Go ahead, Linda.
Here. I agree. I think it's a two-way street. I think that as Asian Americans, I think there are things that I think we need to continue to do to make ourselves so that we're ready for these positions. Frankly, I think to Peter's point earlier, I think we're highly, clearly, there's a, we're about 6%, and even at 6% of the total population, a good number have high levels of education, I think. So I don't think it's a supply issue, frankly, I think. But there is, however, I think there is, within the supply, I think there are challenges to understand what someone needs to do to navigate through an organization. So I think there's a lot of book smart people. I think the question is, do they have the kind of soft skills that's needed to get past a certain level? And I think that becomes where some of the cultural challenges of being Asian can come into play. But with that said, I will also say that, and I'm going to challenge any company to do this, and I've been trying to do this, is to say, I think they really need to rethink what they're defining as leadership, because right now the definition of leadership is very much based on a white male style of command and control, super assertive, but it's my way or the highway almost. And that's not all Asian Americans. And I'm not saying that Asian Americans can't be that. I have met plenty of type A type Asians that can do that. But I've also met a lot that are much more thoughtful and collaborative, listen well, are curious, and they make fantastic leaders. But because they don't show up in the way that people think leaders need to show up, they oftentimes get overlooked and then get left behind. And I think that is a challenge.
So I want to add to that, if I can.
Anne a question though. Do you think, and there are a number of people who have the following theory that says we're not a priority with regard to diversification. That when a company says, okay, who do we need? Well, we have to have a woman because there's a lot of pressure about her, or we have to have African Americans, so forth. But no one says, to be diverse, we really need to have an Asian American. And in fact, for many, many years, if you look at the careers of a lot of people in corporations, right? A lot of them got there because they were head of the Asia practice, right? Or
Yes.
the Tokyo office or whatever, and then they migrated up. And only a few ever got to go from head of the Asian region or whatever to actually becoming, in the C-suite. So is there this question for all of you, is there a problem of just not being a priority for diversity? And if so, what the hell is being done about this, right?
Yeah. Peter, I think that the awareness of diversity and the need for that is pretty high today. I think the acceptance levels there, and for different minority groups, it's been helped. I do not see Asian Americans as an ask when we're in the boardroom looking, on seeking, helping our clients find candidates and prospects. However, it is also incumbent on us, if we feel strongly, to be asking the questions and probing around this. I think there needs to be more of an activist, an agent of change among leaders who feel strongly about it, to be able to properly define the levels of diversity. But to your point, to your question, I haven't seen it as an ask from an ethnicity point of view. They usually say, okay, gender or ethnicity.
Yeah, no, that's right. Vivian, you were going to say something, right?
Well, I'm going to throw a bomb in here because I'm going to show my son. I really believe, like Linda has said, I've been involved in the development of D&I programs, but I found that I think now with this new surge of awareness by the Black Matter folks, is that I think the truth is that, I'm going to say the big racism hasn't been dealt with in a true manner.
Right.
And as long as we don't deal with the core of what that really is, the history of what has happened to all people of color, what has happened to all people of isms, we can't have a boardroom that doesn't accept different cultural affect and mannerisms. That's one point. I think that until we get past some of that, the white, what you want to call now privilege attitude, and where we really start dealing with unconscious bias to understand microaggression, we won't really know how we individually each feel, because certainly we all hold some kinds of stereotypes and visions and biases that we may not even be aware of, that how we treat other people as well.
Well, also
everyone needs to deal with it.
Yeah.
But second of all, let me just finish this, because I find that in government there are a lot of APIs at mid-level management. They're brilliant. They're smarter than most people there. But I find that there's a big disparity and difference between if you're an immigrant, first generation coming from a foreign country, or being born here. And by that I mean, some immigrant families are still supporting families in their homeland. The incomes that we are able to produce in just even the federal government, which isn't a great deal compared to private sector, that many of them are being able to support their families, raise families, send them to college, and send money home. And to them, they're not wanting to rock the boat. They're just happy that they can make more than they would in their own homeland. So that's one layer that I see in terms of the mobility issue. The second is,
let me interrupt and say, what's mixing in here is the obvious issue about generational differences, right?
Mhm.
I mean, that's coming through from all of you are saying. There are really distinctly different problems, whether it's a recent immigrant or a second generation or third generation, and we have to realize that. But the problem overwhelms all generations. In other words,
yeah,
none of these generations, even the more recent young people who are naturally, they've grown up here. They're very different from their first generation family members, but they're still having the same problem, right? So it crosses generational lines as well, right?
Peter, I don't know that it's as, let me just say, when I started compared to how now some of the generations they're getting ahead faster than I ever did. And a lot of it is because of some of these barriers that have been broken, because of some of the firsts. Look, I was always the first to be this, and I was always the first to be that. Now we have more than a few firsts, okay? So that's made a difference in what, and because of
Well,
the
but
role
Linda,
we play in mentoring.
I'm going to be blunt and says, what's the difference between drowning in 2 feet of water and 2 inches of water?
Well,
Right.
as a
I mean,
swimmer, there is no difference.
No. It's still a problem. It's still a problem. If no one
No,
gets to be
I'm
CEO,
not
it doesn't matter whether someone got
Absolutely.
to one level higher.
I
would disagree
understand
with
that, but I'm getting to the point what I said earlier, Peter. We keep chipping away at progress. And until we deal with the heart of what the problem is, which is the racism, and which holds everyone back, people of color, we're not going to deal with it, because we're going to say, just like the old saying of crabs in a pot, we're going to pull each other down. Other minority groups are pulling each other down. Oh, why did that person get ahead before me?
Vivian, I'm going to be firm now and say this can't be a panel about broad racism. This is a panel about Asian American career ceilings. That's what it's all about and what's being done. And so we're gonna I'm gonna ask us to stick to that topic, because if we want to talk about general racism, we could have a 7-hour panel.
No, I'm trying to put it into context, Peter. I think that there has to be some reality in understanding that there's some really institutional barriers, okay, that we need to overcome.
It's beyond just racism. It's things specific to Asian Americans that are being treated differently, right? So let's try to focus on the Asian American problem, because racism may be part of the problem, but it's not the only one, right? It's a lot of things bundled in together. One of which is self-created issues, right? Which is what our parents tell us what we're supposed to do. Don't rock the boat. Don't mentor other people. Asian Americans tend not to mentor people below them. There are a lot of variables involved here. So let's go back to the original topic, and the topic is what is being done by whom and where are the gaps. So let's focus on the gaps now.
Yeah.
So one by one, any one of you, where is it that not enough is being done that could be done in terms of improving either? Remember, it's either the third party outside forces or the internal forces, right? Because it's also internal. The one thing all the surveys show is that what Linda said, which is a lot of the problem is self-created, right? Don't rock the boat, just try to be a scientist, succeed so where is the problem not being, where are the gaps, I guess, in what people are doing to try to solve the problem?
So just for the record, I'm not saying it's only just us. It's a two-way street, and I think perhaps Vivian, I think you're bringing up a good point. Maybe there's a different word to use for it. And I think a lot of it is the unconscious bias that I think is oftentimes talked about in organizations that perhaps may create stereotypes and expectations of what Asians are supposed to be like, and therefore, creates a situation in which we oftentimes may get overlooked, even when we have the kind of requisite skills that are needed. And I think that that's the kind of the dance that we're all playing, right? So we're looking for ways in which we're trying to fit in and be our full selves, right? Bring our whole selves to work and all that. But if we do that, sometimes right now we have cultures within organizations that are not always conducive to that. And so we're trying to figure out, how do I acquire the right kind of skills? And I think that that's what I know from a LEAP perspective, that's what we're at least right now trying to address, is saying, okay, look, let's
where are the gaps? I'm gonna repeat the question until someone answers this question. Where are the gaps in the things that are needed to correct the problem? Okay, I hear what you're saying. You're all saying, here's what the problem is, here's what we're doing. The question
Peter,
on the table is, where are the gaps of things that need to be done that aren't being done to try to solve the problem?
Peter, I want to jump in on that. I think in the business and corporate world, it really starts, the tone at the top is really important. And I think the gap is where we're not getting enough representation, therefore not enough appreciation. However, I'm very hopeful, because while the whole Black Lives Matter wave right now is before us and really raises a lot of emotions and sentiments, I think it is actually a very momentous opportunity for all companies and institutions to revisit what they started on their journey to advancing the D&I agenda. And with that agenda, with that journey, is the ability for us to raise the profile of Asian Americans. So I would say conversations like the ones we're having is critical in raising the awareness that we are the model minority, that we are being stereotyped. So I do think the gap is where the voice is missing at the top of the house.
Yeah.
Or it doesn't have to be the top, it can be the middle.
Yeah.
I mean, what about HR development programs where this is being raised? I think companies are more intentional and purposeful these days. And, as a cohort, we just need to be able to, kind of thread the needle there, the needle's eye there, and be able to raise the issues with similar sentiments and emotions that other diversity groups have.
Yeah, and I think you make a good point, Ann, which is a lot of the problem is whether people at the top who have the ability to change things, whether they feel that there is a problem or not, right? And I do think that is one of the issues that we have to deal with, right? And one of the problems is, I think CEOs, regardless of what their race is, they don't necessarily feel it's a problem. And until someone explains to them that it's either a benefit to them to solve the problem or that's a negative to them if they don't solve them, they're not going to, right?
Yeah, and Peter, I think what's missing is something I want to raise again. If anyone listening in and has not seen it, I thought it was a great example of a company leader at the top who made a commitment for an integrated strategy about what is really needed in making the difference from PepsiCo to their stakeholders. And Ramon LaGuarta has laid out in this paper how they're going to do it from a people, the 3 pillars, from a people point of view, from a business point of view, and community point of view. I think that what is missing is more of that integrated strategy, and how does that also apply to Asian Americans, not just what's
Peter,
in front of us.
I'm
right
going
now.
to turn to questions unless someone wanted to comment on what Ann said.
Well, Peter, I just want to also add, and maybe it builds upon what's been just said. I think what strikes me, I think, and I said this earlier, is there's research that's missing. I think I remember a number of years ago, the Committee of 100 also produced I think it was like an opinion survey. I think any type of research that can help tell our story better will help us to advocate better to these folks who believe that they already know,
What the
you know,
story is, right?
what the story is. And I think that that's also the gap too, is that there's this perception of our success, which isn't necessarily true, but that also is creating these kind of situations where we're not being considered for these other opportunities as well too, because they just assume we're overrepresented. Frankly, I've been told we're overrepresented at the senior levels by people who I believe should know better. That I think is both a gap and a problem, because we have people who do not believe that they're getting the opportunities, and we have people who believe that we have too many opportunities and are focusing on others.
Okay, so now we need to go to the Q&A because we have 29 questions. And of course, we're not going to get to them. We're not going to get through them in the next 15, 20 minutes, but let me go through some. The first one is from an SC2, which says, how do we put in place mentors and role models in the C-suite and board of directors? And someone just put a notice here, so I can't read the rest. Oh, to help promote the careers of mid and entry level staff. And this is a question to any one of you.
Well, I think there has to be a recognition that all groups are, if they do a real analysis of their organization and their demographics, they'll find that there is a lack of representation across the board. And to create a pipeline where they can start parroting that would be something that I would say in terms of a corporate kind of review. Because if, you know, I think currently what is done is when the affirmative action started, it was always, okay, do we have one Asian? Do we have one Black? Do we have one on boards, right? Or on review panels? I would have raised a question, well, what if we have more qualified people to be on the advisory board? Well, no, we only need one woman, we want one Black, one Hispanic, one Asian. So now it's to the point where it's, I think that at least in government, it's a matter of how many do you have, but are they really counting? And do they understand what diverse populations can provide? As organizations, I think we provide that mentoring to help mid-level folks to say, let's look at your skill sets. Let's look at what you're doing. Let's look at also the cultural issues that tie you back. Let's do leadership training so that you understand how to respond. We do a lot of mock interviews and how do you respond. There's one Asian that finally became a senior executive because he went into the meeting with his glasses and he would sit down and kind of, when he would respond, and everyone was saying, okay, next time you go into your next interview, take your glasses off, look eye to eye, don't put your head down. So there are things that you can do in terms of training people on how to be more responsive and how to appear less, that you're ready for executive management positions.
Now, there's a very interesting second question here. It's a very interesting question, I think a thoughtful one. And I think the Black Lives Matter issue was raised earlier in this panel. The question is, during this Black Lives Matter movement, how do we raise the unique challenges and needs of the AAPI community without taking anything away from our Black sisters and brothers? Interesting question, right? It's kind of a dilemma, right?
That was what I was getting at. If we don't start dealing with that whole, and you're talking about unconscious biases, Linda, that's absolutely right. Until we do that, I saw.
No, Linda, that's a different, I mean, Vivian, it's a different question. It's how do you raise our issue without offending people in the Black lives?
Well, you don't offend. You raise it by saying, let's talk about a diverse workforce. Let's talk about all of our unconscious biases. Let's increase the numbers of individuals for diversity and inclusion.
Right.
That's not contrary. It's like promoting that it's not a black-white issue, that it crosses all people of color, and they're all of value, and they all have to be respected and valued in the work setting.
Yeah, so Peter, I would say to Vivian's point, it really is important for companies or any organization to build two things, right? They have to build a sense of belonging from a community point of view. So whether it's a diverse community and within that, you know, a diverse minority group, the employee resource groups that are currently being more and more cultivated as everyone understands the culture of inclusion. Because without a culture of inclusion, there cannot be a robust diversity program. Without the inclusivity that's afforded to any employee, of any color, of any gender, it's not going to happen. So a sense of belonging, a culture that is of inclusion, those are two key tenets. And that, again, I'll say it again, tone at the top, it has to come from top down, because you can do a lot at the middle or the base of the organization. You may want it as a diversity within any company, but you may not have enough resources to go around, or no sense of belonging, and no ability to have a role model. I mean, the role modeling is so important, because I always say, what you cannot see, you cannot be, and I felt that way all along. But I will say that my role models were not Asian Americans. I had a couple of them, but the ones that were within my company, my CEO is an Asian American, Krishnan Rajagopalan. And we are blessed, at Hydrogen Struggles to have this sense of inclusivity and the forums and the conversations, particularly as Black Lives Matter, popped on us. We've had more conversations than not.
Along those lines, I have one question. It's not in here, but there really are some very different, the data is very different depending on what Asian American group you're talking about, right?
Mhm.
And your CEO at Hydrogen Struggle is Indian American, right?
Correct.
And one stark thing that you can see, and this came out in our first webcast,
Mhm.
was that although it is true that all Asian Americans are not doing as well as they should, certain groups, such as Indian Americans, have a much higher number of CEOs in the major ranks. I mean, look
Absolutely.
at Microsoft and so forth,
Mhm.
and also in the at the board level. And so I guess that's a fact. That's not an opinion. It's just a fact. And is there anything from that we can learn from it, or any implications for those people who are trying to go through, or communities trying to make an improvement, right? Is there something to be learned from the Indian American community, for example, that other Asian American groups, could benefit from, for example, right?
Well, I think there's a question about, certainly the literature is out on East Asian and groups and how they do better or fare or against other groups. Part of it
Versus
is,
South Asians, right?
yeah, Southeast, how you, I think the term that was used for women is the same that you use for Asians, is, are you aggressive enough, right? Can you be aggressive or assertive enough? And those are skill sets that, for against the Asian model or Asian stereotype, where's the balance is the question.
Yeah.
How do you become assertive enough and yet not look like you're
Yeah, I think there's a distinction between East Asian and obviously South Asian, and I think
right.
I think that those style differences are, again, I go back to those style differences and the perceptions of those style differences and what's valued over another.
Right.
I think frankly in this country there is a certain style amongst, and this is a culture that's perpetrated at the top too, as Anne has referenced. It starts with the CEO at the top, and certain CEOs are gonna encourage certain kinds of organizational cultures, and I think ones that value more of an aggressive style, you're gonna see those who have that maybe navigate through an organization perhaps more easily or get recognized more easily. And I think for a number of East Asians, it's been a challenge.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. There is, here we go. Are Asian Americans willing to use the political process in order to make a difference? And I guess the question really is, it appeared to the questioner that perhaps Asian Americans are less willing than other ethnic groups to use the political process to try to solve these kinds of problems. Do the three of you feel that's true? And if it is true, what should they do? And of course, another person said, Andrew Yang, it's great that he's, that he ran for president, but I don't think he's the majority, of the trend. So again, are Asian Americans just not aggressive enough politically to try to solve this problem? And if so, what should they do?
I think that we have to have part of it is that Asian communities are going to end up evolving as demographics change. Critical mass makes a difference. Look at on the West Coast, you have a lot more Asians, East Coast in pockets. Those communities that have more of a critical mass, you find that there are APIs in the political process and at the table and beginning to have a voice. So I think, again, it depends on, I think it's critical. I think it's certainly important. I think that there is also a cultural barrier in some ways for folks to be out there campaigning, but certainly more and more are getting involved in both the Democratic and the Republican parties, because I think politicians are learning that those voices are important, just as important. So, yeah.
So there's a question specific for Anne. I guess they're picking on you, Anne.
Okay.
It's again on this issue of, I guess, partly because people do in fact care about things like boards and the senior ranks.
Mm-hmm.
And the question for Anne, there's been a lot of talk to ensure we'll get sufficient diversity on boards, such as, and they mentioned the name of a company and leadership ranks. However, much of the focus has been on women and then underrepresented minorities, and it doesn't appear that Asians fall into that category. So it's a little bit like what we talked about before, but what are the specific actions needed to ensure that Asian Americans are not excluded from this inclusion, an inclusion, so I guess.
Well, Peter, I'm going to come back to my age-old kind of the way I look at it. Is it a supply issue or is it a demand issue? I would say the demand is pretty high in the boardroom for people of color, and bring it on. I placed very recently, three Asian American, Chinese Americans, women on boards. So I don't think, frankly, that it is picked upon that the Asian Americans are not being considered. I think it's also the sense of want, the individual's desire to want to serve on boards and in boardrooms, and the qualifications that get to the top there. So I would say, for example, there's not enough of a pipeline, perhaps. And what we've done at Heidrick and Struggles, for example, which is a very interesting program that we did, what we've done actually is to create a program called the Directors Institute. And in the Directors Institute, what we have afforded is an exchange program. It is it's to accelerate the development of diverse leaders. And you can be an Asian American, or you can be any person of color, or broadly defined diversity. But it's N-2 levels for corporate director and broader operating P&L CEO roles, and to provide them with valuable governance experience and the new skills that, and beyond those that they've gained on their own, in their own companies and boardrooms. This is a board observer exchange program. And it also, we've augmented it with the ability for them to attend board meetings with the host board, rotate through the committees, to give them real-time board-ready experiences for 24 months. And then we augment that with an education program at the Stanford School, the Corporate Governance Stanford Rock Center for Corporate Governance. And then we also would provide coaching and feedback throughout the program. And I think this is actually phenomenal as I think about it, even though my firm is the one that created it. I think it is a win-win for sponsored executives and participating clients, where Heidrick and Struggles helps them leverage the unique experiences to create really compelling pairings. And so I think that there are things that we can do to develop and prepare talent for the boardroom and to be ready. A lot of the HR functional leaders can do,
They
you know,
don't
can
move.
provide a lot of that.
Yeah.
And again, I will keep saying it's tone from the top until we get representation at the top.
Yeah.
We're not going to get much movement.
And it's really, really hard also to solve the following problem, which is how do you get Asian American leaders to mentor junior people? And that is a serious, serious problem. And that one's a hard one to fix, right? How do you fix that, right? But it is clearly the case. And we all know that a lot of the ways that people end up being CEO or, senior ranks is because they have a mentor.
Yes.
And I think Asian Americans have a double whammy, which is they, they don't get mentorship necessarily from non-Asian Americans, and then they don't get mentorship from Asian Americans. So it's a double whammy. And I don't know how you solve
Peter,
that.
I have a point of view on that. In my mind, mentorship doesn't have to be Asian American to Asian American. In fact, it should not be Asian American to Asian American. Not that that's not desirable. To be able to understand how to function in the white Western mind and world, you probably should want someone who's a mentor and a sponsor to help you really navigate what is probably new ground or different ground. So I would say mentoring is interesting because I'm the recipient of a mentorship from our late chairman. So I got lucky. I got the mentorship for 20 good years. But you've got to earn your mentorship. But not only that, you cannot necessarily pick your mentor. I think the mentorship relationship is a very special and interesting relationship where, you got to be visible and earn your right there, but it's also chemistry. So you have to put yourself out there.
Let's face it, and
You have to put
we all feel that companies should promote people based totally on their track record and their merits, we all know that it's just the nature of human beings, that there are other factors.
Yeah, the reality doesn't happen that way.
And so it's just a factor. And I think those who are listening, who are in the middle of their career, they just have to recognize that and recognize that they're going to have to find ways to either seek out a mentor who may just not have thought of mentoring with them, right? Or realize that it's not just how good your scores are or what your numbers look like and so forth, which is somewhat of a tendency among Asian Americans, right?
Peter, can I just interrupt real quickly? I want to add a different word to this conversation because mentors are important, but I think even more important, especially if you want to be in the C-suite, is sponsor. And I think that's what Anne was talking about, the special relationship. You need somebody who's going to be literally willing to take you under their wing, walk you through whatever path and say, don't do that, don't do that. I mean, really just literally like telling them, okay, you need to go for this job. This is the person who literally is pounding a table for you in those behind closed door meetings.
And what's the difference between a sponsorship and a mentor? I'm not sure I understand. That's why I'm asking.
Well,
no, I'm asking.
I was just
what's
going to say, I think mentors give you advice, but they're not vested in you. I think sponsors care they may or may not care about you, but they're willing to put their reputation on the line for you because they know you're going to deliver.
Yeah, because I personally, I don't draw that distinction, but I see what you're saying.
There is a big distinction though, Peter. Yeah. I think without proper sponsorships that are formalized within a company, I think to the way I see it, mentors are who you want to be learning as a role model. Mentors, as advisors. Sponsorship actually is when you are really an ace player in the company. You happen to be Chinese or American American or East Indian, doesn't matter, but you're high potential. Yeah. And the company has got sponsors where they look at it and say, that one's earned the right to be promoted or sponsored to other, other career promotions, and really work hard, and sometimes behind the scenes. Yeah. But
on the chat, we just got a flood of additional terms: coaches, advocates, and so forth. So I think the point is not so much the difference between definition of sponsor, mentor, coach or whatever. It's people who can help you succeed, right? And there are different nuances about how that is. But I think there's a deficit. I think there's a deficit across the board of all of these things, right? Not enough coaches, not enough mentors, not enough sponsors, not enough advocates across the board, right? Now we've finished our hour, and one of the things we always promise is that we'll start on time and that we end on time. And I want to thank all of the panelists, who participated. I think there were some very good thoughts about why we have the problem, what's being done, and so forth. To be honest, I wish we had a little bit more on, where the gaps are, and maybe characterize of the different organizations where there seem to be gaps in terms of organizations focused on the problem. But that's okay. Maybe we have another webcast. I want to just remind everyone that the next Committee 100 Asian American Career Ceiling event will be July 7th. And to accommodate all those millennials who are working really, really hard during the day, it's actually going to be at 8 p.m., right? So that people can either dial in at the end of the day on the West Coast, or after dinner on the East Coast. And it's going to be very unique because we have 3 millennials, 1 woman, 2 men, different professions. But we're also currently conducting a survey where we're going to share with you the results of the survey from a couple hundred millennials as far as their attitudes about some of the issues related to millennials, but also about this issue that we're talking about now. And for the millennials, it's particularly tough because you have discrimination, you have 2 downturns, right? They got hit by the 2008-9, now they get hit again, and so forth. So they got a lot to worry about. So thank you very much. Thank you, Vivian, Anne, and Linda. This is very, very helpful. And I hope all of you who are listening found it useful. This is being recorded, and it's going to be available on the Committee 100 website in the next couple of days. So thank you all.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.